Welcome. And for those of you who might be listening to this recording later, I just want to offer a special greetings as myself and my dear friend and Ecopsychology Initiative community member, Ann Carroll, are here to have a conversation. And we're to have a conversation about spirituality generally and how it shows up in this world and the intersection with nature and our planet. And yet, before saying anything more about that, I thought I would just introduce, for those of you who don't know Ann, and I imagine many of you do, if you have taken any of our trainings, I have tried to either guilt, cajole, plead with Ann to join us in our webinars, and she is just such a gem, and I know many of you are aware of that and have frequently commented on it. And so I've known Ann for many years, and it feels like even longer. It feels like our connection is a timeless one. And I consider her not only a dear friend and an elder to me, but just a core part of the council of people I turn to as part of Ecopsychology Initiative for guidance and support and inspiration, both in webinars and otherwise. So we've been talking for a long time about how nice it would be just to come together and have a conversation and let it be unscripted and see what unfolded, excuse me, from there. And so that's been a long dormant seed. And then after a number of classes and webinars in 2020, the idea came up again, in part because I think we both felt that oftentimes the webinars dropped into something deeper and there was an experience that is probably didn't belong in a box, but each of us felt that there was maybe a spiritual quality to it in some ways, that people were coming from and experiencing and offering, and the cumulative whole, so to speak. And so we said, well, why don't we just have a conversation about spirituality, her and I, and see where it goes. And maybe no one will be interested, but maybe some will. And so that's been the plan for a while, and thought that, especially as we have our upcoming class, the next one we're offering is nature-inspired spirituality. We thought that timing would go well. And now all of a sudden, in light of the year that 2020 was, climate change and COVID, politics and otherwise inequalities, Black Lives Matter, it all just felt so ripe for exploring in a different lens, from a kind of eco-spiritual lens for that matter. And then her and I live not only in Maine, but in the United States. And so the events of last week, I think, have impacted us both. And so this feels like this opportunity to come together for her and I and just see what's going to happen. And for each of us, we've made an agreement that we're not going to script it or plan it. And so the one agreement we have is that we'd each do a bit of a check-in. And given that I'm already talking, I thought I would just riff from there, moving beyond the introduction, to say that I love you, Ann. I am so excited to be here. I'm curious, not really knowing what unfolds. And yet there's this deep rootedness and trust with you that whatever is going to emerge is going to be generative for me. I hope for you as well. And ideally, maybe for anyone else who might listen to this, but it's a good practice for me to be non-attached. It's also a really good practice for me to not plan too much and just to show up, which is what I think ultimately spirituality is. It's something that, as you and I have said, it is not something we can think our way to. It's not even really something that we can plan or put in any boxes, as it is just a full-hearted being showing up with all aspects of myself to this, to see what emerges and then flow with that. So I'm taking a breath. I'm happy to be here. And I'm curious. I'm curious at what can happen when two come together and meeting in the way, and that pollination, and what is the alchemy that will come from this. So thank you very much for sharing this with me, whatever unfolds. And yeah, a lot of gratitude.
Dennis, it takes me back to that moment when I think it was the first time we met at a Northeast Spiritual Guild gathering of some kind. And I remember right away, you and I went outside, of course, and sat on one of those wooden tables. And that's where the conversation began. And it's never stopped, essentially. It's the truth of it. And I even remember that first time knowing that we both knew something that was unsayable. And how do you, especially to somebody who you think you've just met, but you've apparently always known, how do you speak the unsayable? And so I have very, very clear memory of where this conversation began. I think the table was even red, painted red, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess if I were to start off with a conversation, no, not start off, continue it from the red table, I would say that that dimension that you and I were pointing at that time is truly, the thing about it is it's so intimate. And I have to, it's the depth of my trust of you and of us that said, yes, let's go ahead and try and see if one can talk about it, even if one can't talk about it, which on my part meant a willingness to share a couple of the most profound experiences in my life, which are the kind of experiences you don't say out loud. It's a little bit, I was thinking about it this morning, thinking it's a little bit about, you don't go ahead and say the things that you said when you were first making love with your husband. That's just, it's so intimate that it takes a great deal of both trust in you, in us, but also in the importance of the willingness to share it. I just read a wonderful Sufi saying, very simple. I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. And I think that's it. So I'm going to try. I'll start off by trying to share, if that's all right with you, the first experience.
Can I just respond, Anne? Because I was so appreciative of what you just offered insofar as like there is an intimacy and it requires this trust. I also think it requires a spirituality a courage. And it's this bravery to show up in our most vulnerable ways. And I think it's almost a prerequisite, I think, insofar as if I can't be willing to be vulnerable in myself and with you, then I think there are limits that come into place. And so instead, can I choose to courageously open my heart and my soul and my mind and all aspects of myself to not only be seen, but to be received and then to take you in. And that, I think, to me, is what spirituality is in part about, is to venture forth so vulnerably and intimately with ourselves in life that we're willing to be transformed. And I think it's really poignant in our world today that we can be intimate and vulnerable with uncertainty.
Absolutely. And there's another element to that, I think, to the vulnerability, an element that's been incredibly missing in our world. And that's a kind of profound honesty. I cannot share it if I get confused about the hidden treasure being me, my ego wanting to be seen, or knowing deep down and being willing to share that hidden treasure wanting to be known, it's not me. It may come. And if I get those confused, and I think that's part of what makes us hesitant, because the ego always wants to grab whatever it can and say, look at me. Mine as much as anybody's. And so one is always aware of, can I share that vulnerability coming from a place that's way deep down, deeper than that?
Yes, and that I think is the only way we can be transformed.
Exactly.
And that to me is what spiritual life in practice is about, is that we move beyond the egoic identification and the ongoing accumulating I, me, my project, as opposed, and to, but there is a loss in it.
Yeah,
And there is that vulnerability that is almost a prerequisite insofar as we're letting go and shedding. And that's in a world that values fixity and control and power and reputation and all these things, not to mention our own psyches, which want stability and keep it together and make sure we're loved and liked. To throw the doors open is,
vulnerable.
yeah, it's both the only way and it's the hardest thing.
So let me try and share the first experience, being very clear about the hidden treasure, not being me, or not being me special, as it were. So I've got to go back in time. I had, I mean, we're going back, I think, before the days, even before ecotherapy was clearly understood. And I have gotten a Hindu meditation form, Kriya Yoga, which I'm practicing, dedicatedly. I'm totally in love with it. I'm totally in love with ideas of Eastern ideas. And suddenly our house is, we're in Camden, Maine. The house is under construction. I can't meditate there. And I learned that the Episcopal Church is open and I can go there and meditate. So I take my Hindu meditation down to the Episcopal Church. I have to say, I was brought up with totally secular, no religion except for hard work, good Puritan hard work. So that my slate is blank that way. And so I go in and I do that every morning. I go in, it's lovely in there, it's quiet, and I do my Kriya Yoga. And then somebody asks me, invites me if I want to come to a service. So I go to a service, and lo and behold, I know all the words. Now, where do I know all those words from? I don't know. But to make a long story short, I finally decide, yes, I think maybe I will become baptized along with my Kriya Yoga. I guess I'll get baptized. I'll even become confirmed. It's so lovely. So the week before my confirmation, I'm there doing my meditation, and I hear this voice tell me very clearly, you need to go to, it was a monastic retreat of sisters in New York. And I lean over to the friend next to me, who's a associate sister there, and I say, I just got this message, but there's no way I can go. My then English husband can't stand the church. He's not going to say that's all right. He's going to be left with the kids. No way, can't go. And then my friend turns to me and says, I can't take you because I've got an engagement. So fine, I go home. I get a phone call saying, the engagement was just broken. Pack your bag, I can take you. And my English husband says, that's fine, go right ahead, I'll take the kids. Now that in itself, that whole thing right there is a miracle. I go, I get there at about 10 o'clock at night. And I say, I've come at 10 o'clock at night. It was the night of a full moon, and I have this beautiful room right outside a great big oak tree. Wonderful old Gothic room, high windows, full moon, oak tree. I fall asleep and I get up sometime around 5 o'clock to begin my Kriya Yoga, my meditation. And as I'm meditating, I'm right there with the full moon in the branches of the oak tree. And suddenly, whatever this ordinary reality is, disappears. And it disappears. And I'm flooded with light. But if I were to try and describe that light, it's not like sunlight. It's not even like moonlight. It's when you pull your hand through the ocean and there's that phosphorescence. And my whole body was covered with this light. And that didn't go away for 3 days. I mean, others could see it. That was the amazing thing. And I didn't like to lie down at night because I was afraid that I would crush it. I didn't want to, because it was so like this. I even picked up a book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, and wrote the experience down, which later became a tapestry that I'll share with you. Took me 10 years to do the tapestry, but I'll share that with you sometime. But I couldn't, for those 3 days, read anything except for the Song of Songs because it's so erotic. And that experience is an experience, it's an erotic experience, but a spiritual experience. And it has this deep, deep, I can't really describe it. It's an experience of love. The love is just so overwhelming. It's pouring out, pouring into you and out of you. And I have one more such experience. I'll save that for afterwards, that in India. But you go ahead from there. You share. That was.
I'm feeling moved, very moved by your story. And it strikes me that I think love is at the center of it all. And it's the thread that, to me, it's that current that weaves through all the different religious and spiritual landscapes. And it's an erotic, it's a sensual love, as you talked about. It's not abstract and ethereal or overly cognitive. And what strikes me is that in some ways it's like making love, insofar as in those peak moments of vulnerability and intimacy, as we talked about earlier, that where we begin and where the other begins and the endings, it becomes so permeable. It's no longer clear, like these fixities that we have about, oh, this is me and that's you, and these beautiful experiences, whether it's making love or being looking near the oak tree and the full moon and the light. All of a sudden, like, there's this dissolvement of this sense of separation, and what remains is this profound love and this awareness of our vast interconnectedness of all things, like the mycorrhizae and the roots of trees. It's seeing that a lot of the ways that we delineate our world of, like, I'm here and you're there and this and that, and this dualistic notion, that through love and through intimacy and through these profound experiences, and like you, a lot of mine have been with nature, that I see, like, oh, you're a part of me and I'm a part of you. And I think navigating that in the human realm is what's so difficult. How do we hold, as I love to say, the both and of this, like, deeper awareness and identity, to which I am not limited to this form, and on the other hand, I still have 2 kids and a family and all this that I need to go take care of in the kind of relative self and lives that we lead. And so it makes me wonder what it was like for you to make those transitions from these 3 days of such a expansive state to now all of a sudden come back to your kids and your husband and these different aspects. And I had an experience for me that was maybe not quite as peak as what you described, but it was a very extended time of, say, a different consciousness, maybe.
Yeah, it is.
And it was hard for me not to get attached to that. And it was hard for me not to feel sad and disappointed when I kind of landed back in this little self. And I think especially because I did grow up with a spiritual background. I started when I was 5 years old going to church. And later my spiritual life and practice evolved into Eastern traditions. And I think underneath it all was this desire to transcend. Like I wanted to be the acolyte and the choir boy at first. And later I wanted, nirvana, because I thought I wanted to bypass human experience. I wanted to transcend all these things. And so to have this experience, I was driving across country through the Smoky Mountains and was listening to Eckhart Tolle for parts of it, and then just stopping the drive and sitting in the mountains. And it was really hard not to get attached to that. It's like, oh, this is what I wanted all along. And then to realize like, okay, now I have to come back into this form and this life. And it was really difficult.
Yes, I remember very clearly, had I meant to bring the Song of Songs so I could read some of the passages, so I'm going to have to do it from memory. But it lasted for 3 days until we were driving back into Portland, and I can feel it suddenly entering Portland, Maine. I can feel it just sort of disappearing. It's going, I'm back in ordinary me, and it doesn't feel that great. It feels like clothes that are too tight, or and they're too tight because I put on too much weight. That's why they're too tight. And still, there's these wonderful phrases, both in St. John of the Cross and in the Song of Songs, which I kept reading. Where have you gone? Just calling to the beloved. Where have you gone? Why have you left? Where are you? And the advantage of it for me, now I'm back, how old was I? I was in my young 30s. The advantage of it was, of course, as you said, you want that. It's so, that depth of love and beauty is so unspeakably beautiful that you want it. So it was like this incredible carrot. How can I get back there? And because of that experience, of course, it made me get up for years at 4:30 and meditate for 3 hours. And, one really wants to become enlightened. That it was so fabulous. You want to become enlightened. And it takes years to learn, at least for me. Face it, sweetheart, you're not going to get enlightened. And also, it's a little bit like being married for 20, 30, however many years. It was as if you wish you could go back and have that original first experience. And what's being asked of you in all those years of meditation, when you think what you're going to do is be special and get enlightened, you're actually being drawn to another form of spiritual maturity, I think.
And what do you think that is?
Well, I mean, now, many, many decades later, I realize that there's at times, a kind of, well, it's almost like a silence or a stillness, it's a profound acceptance. It's a profound peace with life as it is. Now, is it always like that? Was it like that last week when the Capitol was being mobbed and stormed? No. But there is another space there that's much more at peace with itself than that ecstasy. But had I not known that ecstasy, I might not have done all the hard work that it took to come to moments of extraordinary simplicity. I mean, it's paradoxical. But that hard work is a part of it. Every spiritual tradition. I mean, I think even those extraordinary saints who fall into it overnight, there's still a lot of discipline.
Yeah.
And
yeah, no, it strikes me, Anna, thinking back to when I was studying with an indigenous man in California, and he commented how he often had students who wanted to come study with him because there was this idea of that carrot, as you described, like, oh, fill in the blank. Everyone has a different carrot.
yeah,
But he said, eventually we have to face ourselves. We have to face the shadow and the hard work and the discipline. And many of us don't want that. And especially in a time of Amazon and quick clicks and you get it, that day or the next, that I think to experience. And I noticed I was going to say to realize that spiritual maturity, but that almost implies you get there and then you're at the top of the mountain, as opposed to it's an ongoing arriving and experiencing of this. It does take intention and effort and discipline. And it's almost like a bait and switch, because I think initially for me, it was accumulation. It was accumulation of the experiences, the love and the joy and the transcendence and the peace. And I didn't feel as beholden to the waves of life.
yeah,
So it's like, ooh, this is good. I want more of that. And I'm by nature somewhat of a perfectionist. So I thought, oh, spiritual enlightenment is the ultimate actualization of perfection. And I think you get far enough into the path to realize that actually the process is almost of dissolution. And it's like, oh, I thought I was going to be accumulating, but I have to let go of that. And I have to relinquish and surrender here and there until there is nothing left but that unconditional, timeless thisness. And I don't always experience it. And when I do, though, I realize I wouldn't trade it for anything.
yeah.
And I do wonder how, though, how do we dance between unconditional love and acceptance and stillness and silence, while also being actively engaged, and to not sit by on the sidelines, removed and bypassed, as I think I initially wanted from the human messiness, and rather saying, no, you know what? We have to take a stand and take action, whether it's with climate change or with injustice or inequalities or threatening of our democracies or otherwise.
Or marriage.
Or marriage, yeah.
Children. Life itself. I mean, I too, for years, I longed to transcend it all. I mean, and that was the seduction of such an experience. I'll share the second one if that's all right, because that was many years later. That was in India. And we were at the ashram of Ramana Maharshi, if for those of you who know. At that time, my husband of many decades now, who was a Franciscan lay brother, I think is what it's called, was a devotee of Ramana Maharshi. And so we were there at the ashram, and I always loved him. And he went there, he spent 57 years, I think he was there at Arunachala, which is the holy mountain, which he called his guru, this mountain. Every afternoon, all the people that were there would gather on the side of the mountain and meditate facing the setting sun. And I want to tell you, hot, this is southern India, it is hot. It's no wonder he never wore anything except a tiny diaper. It is beyond. And so there we are sitting, meditating, all of us on the mountain. That night, I have a sort of waking vision in which I'm sitting there watching the setting sun, and Ramana comes again, his face behind the full moon. So his face is the full moon, and says, I want you, here I am facing the setting sun. I want you to turn around and watch the full moon rising. And then it tells me that it's rising backwards, and it tells me exactly the degree, which I don't understand at the time. Later, I realized, and the degree was exactly the degree to which the moon circles more slowly than the sun. So the apparency is of the moon falling backward in comparison. But I didn't know any of that. It's sort of a way that whatever that beyond the beyond says, this is not unreal. I'm going to give you some real facts. 22.3 degrees, I think it was, falling backwards. And then it says, and so turn and watch the full moon rising. And as I do that, that full moon once again is pouring down that luminosity, just pouring down. There are moments where it's pouring down to such an extent I can't even look at it. I have to look away and then look back. And the message that's coming through is, once again, this is what samadhi feels like. This is what enlightenment feels like. And it went along for the whole course of the moon rising. The next day I felt deathly ill and we had to come back to the States, but that's something else. So there are those two very, very powerful experiences that exists, which is the reason that I thought it was valuable to share it. There is that timelessness dimension in time. And it's not, that hidden treasure is not my ordinary egoic dimension of consciousness. It just isn't. And the more you're aware of it, the more you realize that really is the source of love. That's where it's really coming from. But it flows through this gorgeous, precious embodiment. And I know people often think that Ramana, because he sort of pioneered again non-dualism in the modern world, they think of it as being beyond nature, beyond the body, but that's not at all true. Ramana's body was continually covered with monkeys, peacocks. There's a beautiful one with his holding a chipmunk in his hand. And the chipmunk, you know how chipmunks are, totally quiet and calm. So when you asked me before, what does spiritual maturity look like? It looks like that chipmunk. It really does. A chipmunk that's completely calm, serene, just sitting there in the hand. His spiritual practice was to walk up the mountain, walk around the mountain, live in caves on the mountain. I mean, his life, and to be so devoted, like Native American wisdom, to a place, not to all places, to a place, to Arunachala, like Maine. You know, it's a real dedication to the earth, to all sentient beings. It sounds, when you look at it intellectually, go beyond the body, but it's not. That's what's so hard to describe, that it's beyond and it's totally within. It's both and the mind can't get that. The mind has a really hard, it's either this or it's that. So I'm still trying to be that chipmunk. Truly, I mean that truly.
It's beautiful, Anne. Yeah, it's just, I'm feeling it in my heart. And as you said, it's there's a song lyric from a yogic song that I used to play in yoga class that said, "Who feels it knows it."
Mhm.
And we can read all the text, you can cite all the information about Ramana and otherwise. And unless we feel what it is to be that chipmunk, unless we feel it in our hearts and our bodies, it is not complete. And it's only in the full embodied experience of it that we realize something that's beyond
Right. Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And I'm so struck how for you, and I know for me, and I think for many people generally, and certainly in the EPI community, that nature is that catalyst. It is the symbolism in the mirroring. It is the experiences. It is the teaching and the wisdom that all coalesce to germinate the seed in the seed of spirit in our hearts. And I don't think that everyone has to have that experience. And one of my favorite first memories, I remember being at the Alcyon at that picnic table and being amongst the trees. And then I think the next time we got together was at the beach nearby with all those stones.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
And it felt so fitting that we were connecting, you and I, but on this deeper level as part of this living, breathing, evolving planet, and aware of this feeling, as you said, like the continuance was what you had spoke about when we first checked in. Like, when really did we meet? When did the story begin? And it's like that tree. I mean, you can measure the rings on a tree to know how old it is, but that tree is part of a larger and longer story. Or those rocks that the waves were crashing against at the ocean when we were there. Like, how old is that rock? What is that story of that beach and the ever unfolding evolution that is taking place around us in the natural world, but is also within us? And certainly in my relationship with you.
And you know, one of the problems with language is even the language within and without, as if there was a within and a without, as if I had a within and I had a without. That vulnerability is total permeability as well. And I say that because, and it was something that Raman always said, but it took me years to really, really understand that. And years of doing even things like Feldenkrais and so forth, certainly Tai Chi, but, and Qigong. But, and it's going to sound trite when I say this, but that place of that calm chipmunk is the most natural place in the world. It's just, I'm just in that space. I experience it being as natural as the rock, as the tree, as anything. The unnatural space is the one where I say within and without, as if there were a separation there. And you can't even use the word separation, because then once again you've lost it, because its permeability is, and the experience of it is absolutely, there I am at my most natural. And I think a little bit that's what distinguishes it from the ecstasy of those great big mystical experiences. The chipmunk is not, it's not doing ecstasy in the hand. It's being absolutely and utterly who that chipmunk is. And so I think maybe that spiritual maturity is like that. That's which I find so hard to describe. It's not that wonderful adolescent. I mean, they're lovely. I don't mind if somebody wants to give me one tomorrow. It's fine. I'll accept it any day. But some part of me knows that pulled you in, like falling in love pulled you into marriage. But then the real work begins. How do I remain rooted or in touch with that current while I'm taking the dog out to pee, or that's an easy one. How do I retain that current when I'm watching last week the Capitol being mobbed? And at least for me, it's your question has been a lifetime's work, and I don't have the answer yet. If the answer, I don't have the answer except watching the chipmunk or the flower opening, real simple stuff.
Parable of the Buddha when asked what is enlightenment, and he just held up the flower.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yes. Yeah. It's simpler than simple. That's the thing that's so hard to, our minds don't like that level of simplicity.
And it's more profound than profound.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there can be a way that even if we are able to dwell and abide in this true nature and what I sometimes call the natural or eco self, that is that chipmunk just being the chipmunk, or it's Anne just being Anne and Dennis being Dennis. I think the acquisitive mind, as influenced and permeated by our societies, and like, okay, now what's next?
Yeah.
And I think in 2020 had and continue to, I don't want to pretend that I'm passive, of having my own reckonings of like, okay, do this and offer this and share that and take care of the kids and make sure I make time for my wife. And and what gets lost is the flower, is really noticing that flower or the chipmunk.
I don't know about you, but I know for me that a lot of that busyness is about, it's embarrassing to say this, but we said we'd be vulnerable and honest. It's about being significant. The wanting to be significant, the wanting to do something that's significant. And at that moment, I literally forget that the hidden treasure which wants to be seen is not me. I am not the hidden. I mean, ultimately, if I am truly who I am, but if I'm truly who I am, the whole question of significance is gone. There's just a shining. So a lot of my busyness has a lot of ego in it still. And it's lovely. It's absolutely true to say the chipmunk being the chipmunk and me being me. But damn, it takes a lot of hard work because the ego is so clever, so clever. Anybody who underestimates its cleverness, for me to get, what I'm looking at in Trump is just an exaggerated form of a whole lot of forces in myself I need to look at. I need to own. Where's Trump in me? I mean, it's wonderful because I can project it all out there on him, and he's a wonderful, he's a wonderful place to project it. but I can lose that what I'm being asked and what we're being asked to do is see where that lies in me. And so, I mean, it's one of those funny things that to be myself is simpler than simple. And yet it's one of the hardest, it will be the hardest thing in my whole life to be that simple. It's going to take letting go of a lot of stuff.
I've told this story a lot, but it feels pertinent now. I went to a birthday party of this guy who was turning 50. His wife is a dear friend and very spiritual person, and he is less confined by boxes. And the birthday party, there was these kind of like party gag gifts, and they were Miller Lite beer cozies. And I don't know if you've ever seen the beer cozies, the plastic things you put the beer in, keeps them kind of cold. And the idea is when everyone got one as a souvenir or whatever. And when you left, you were going to have him sign your beer cozy, just as kind of a gag. I went up to him at the end and handed him mine. He looked at me and looked back down the beer cozy, and I finally wrote something. And I didn't look at it till I left. And it's subsequently proven to be one of the great teachers for me. And I don't know what he meant by it, but he said, "Dennis, you'll never get there. You'll never get it." And oh, yeah. I mean, both the worst and the best thing, because for me, it was all about like, oh, eventually I summit that mountain. I get that experience. I attain nirvana, and then I'm there. And as you were talking about the simplicity, I was reminded, like, we never get there, because to the extent we get there,
You're not there.
then we got to show up and do it again. And not to mention, as you said, that the ego is so sneaky and just co-ops and jumps in just at the moment we, maybe have had a flicker of open sky without it. And so in that way, it's a continued showing up, and to own the places where my shadow steps in, where my ego also is wanting to be significant or to be special or seen. I really feel a lot of times about change, that I see this world filled with suffering. And I have two really young kids, and I worry about, did I make a mistake bringing them into this world? And what is the life that they're going to inherit? And, and I think partly from a real love, like wanting to be a catalyst for change. And for me, I feel most called in this intersection with nature and psychology and spirituality. And so in some of those ways, it feels really healthy, and I am driven, and I want to be of service. And I feel that the eco-psycho-spiritual has an important role to play in this shift. And to remember the squirrel or the chipmunk, to see how it constantly be this accumulating and more and never really getting there, and to thereby never be content, and to miss the time with my wife, to miss the smile with the child, or time with a dear friend, or the flower blossoming, or the moon shining in the stars. And so to remember this both and, like, yes, to keep engaging in service and change and love, and to be hyper aware of that quality. And is the ego getting attached or seeking something to which there is no end? Because, talking earlier about that big story, that when I die, the story will continue, and it will still be getting written, and it will still be unknown. And I think thereby the work is do the work, to do what I can, and then to be done. Because otherwise, if I don't make the time and space in my own life and in my own being to look at my shadow, then I start to embody more of the consciousness that I think Trump and others characterize. And to not make it about that's bad, but the vision I have and what I yearned for all beings, and my children and the chipmunks, is this, what I call the eco consciousness. And I need to be aware of the places that my shadow co-opt that or impede me from moving from that place.
Yeah.
I think about Gandhi talking about be the change you want to be. And that's not just the external change, but it's the origins from where it comes. And to make sure that I don't get lost in the external quantifiable quantity, so to speak, that I lose sight of what is the quality, what is the consciousness with which I am living from that is thereby rippling out.
Yeah, and I think you've really hit, and I think you've hit also on where collectively as a world culture we are. We are at a spiritually, in some ways, a new, always a timeless, same place, but also a new one. And that is, how do I hold them both? How do I hold them both together? And I find that, like you, and like you were saying, there are a lot of things that I do that are really coming from that place of a place that's much bigger than just me. And I know what that feels like. And I know what that little egoic voice sounds like. You can hear it in your head. It will say things like, did I do that well? Was I like, all of those little voices. And recently what I've said is just be aware of them. Don't beat them up. That the ego is very closely aligned to the survival instinct in all element, in all beings. Don't beat it up. It's just doing its job, but do be aware of it, because what it can do is, the great thing about those mystical experiences is, it's true. That that dimension really exists. It's always there, but I can put a very dark cloud between it and me, that and me, by my own, simply by the machinations of my own mind. So I do think it helps to be aware. Oh, there's that voice again. I don't think it helps a lot to beat it up. And I do think, as you say, that it's very essential to know that a lot of my acts do come from a place that is bigger than that little voice. Even if that little voice tries to sneak in and say, look at me. It's almost like a little child learning how to let it be and still carry on, because we watched a film the other day of Mount Athos with everybody running away. If I go to the top of the mountain and there are no women there, and I all of that way I will embody love. And my feeling is it's no longer appropriate. That's not what takes courage. What takes courage is, as you did, to have children, to have marriage, to live this life, to do all these workshops. That's what takes courage, knowing at the same time that any real healing is coming from a dimension. It's both beyond and it's not beyond. I love what he wrote to you. It's so true. You can't ever get there. And if you get there, that's not it. If you're still there when you get there, that's not it. It's so funny. And yet at the same time, you'll get it if you're there when you get it. You can't. That's where Zen is so good.
Well, it just speaks to the mind can't grasp it. We want to hold so much, but the real essence it can't grasp. And as you were talking about courage, what struck me, I think, is to keep showing up knowing that I can't prevent loss.
Yeah.
And I can't prevent pain and loss for my children or myself or the planet or loved ones. And this comes up a lot when, in our courses on the psychology of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many of us are understandably fueled to rectify the planetary degradation that is happening, and some of which is around carbon and climate change and impacts to humans. And I think some of it in a lot of ways is fueled by not wanting to face grief, and not wanting to face the loss that is already happening and likely will continue to happen even if we do everything right. And I think I know that in myself of like, oh, if I just work more and do this and share that, then maybe I can spare the pain and hardship and the messiness of life. And even if, even if I did figure out this one solution for that one thing, there's going to be something else. And I think my work is to make space, not only, as you spoke about, with the awareness to differentiate the chaff and the straw, to see what is essential and what is egoic. But it's also to make space to act without that. In the Bhagavad Gita and yoga, they talk about action without attachment to the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that I don't care about the outcome, but not that I don't want to be acting in a way that I think I'm going to prevent X, Y, and Z. And if I don't do that, or if I don't get this outcome, then it's a failure or a disappointment, as it is that I'm throwing out seeds and hoping they germinate, and hopefully we have regeneration and healing and otherwise. And there still will be pain and suffering and hardship that I can't spare for myself or anyone else. And that I need to have done the work to be able to sit in those fires. And I think as we move forward into greater uncertainty and tumultuousness, which I fear is going to keep happening, I think many think like, oh, this 2020 was the worst. And it may not be, I hope so, but it likely isn't. And climate change is getting worse. That I think the true psycho-spiritual work is, can we sit in community and connection with the fires of loss and hardship and not run away? And sometimes to take action, and sometimes it's just to offer hugs and love and accompanying death.
Yeah, I want to say, not only, what was your phrase? Not only can we not avoid pain and suffering. No, you didn't, that wasn't your phrase, but I wanted to say, I think one of the lessons before us is embracing death.
Yes.
Embracing death. And I mean, I think with the Bhagavad Gita, you really hit it on the head, what we're trying to so impossibly say. And that is, it's very difficult to embrace death, I think, without the experience of a power infinitely greater than I am.
I was just thinking that. I mean, I'm not surprised that you and I would be there, but that was exactly that. We need those roots, those sustenance to enable us to be resilient, to be generative. And for me, that power, that source, and I'm aware that even though I spent much of my early life in the Christian faith, I've hesitated to use the word God, because I think it means so many different things to people. But like, I need that connection to spirituality and that power, the divine, or else I really am lost. I've lost all rootedness.
It's the one brilliant, brilliant thing about the 12 step. When it says, I don't care what you call your power greater than yourself, but there will be no healing without it. And I've watched, I had a son on heroin for 14 years. So I know that pain, and having to let go and confront the probable death of your beloved child. He lived by a miracle. Absolutely by a miracle. But you can't do that all alone, just hanging on to your willpower. You absolutely, the only way you can do that is by having, and you have to struggle. I've watched so many people struggle with finding their power that was infinitely greater than themselves, without which there's no recovery. And if we're going to go through, as you say, what lies ahead of us, I think one of the reasons you and I decided to do this was because we knew that without that, there's no healing. It's too big. It's bigger than all of us. What's being asked of us is enormous. And we're all going to need, and you, I don't care what you call it. And I know you'll have to struggle for it, but it's worth every ounce of the struggle. And I think, as you would say, you can sort of follow an inner voice will help you. You can follow the tree, you can follow the path, nature will help you discover what that power that's infinitely greater is for you.
Yeah, as you said the word healing and this power, I was thinking of the etymology of both healing and holiness is wholeness.
Yeah.
And I think it necessitates that I begin by being connected and in a really gritty, embodied, heartfelt way of the wholeness of my psyche. And that includes my shadow. That includes Donald Trump. That includes all beings, right? The white supremacist and otherwise. And in doing that, then I connect with the wholeness around me. And that means connecting with people who are different from me. You know, I mentioned earlier about the psychology of climate change. Like, we want to change people's minds, but we do it with an agenda. As opposed to, like, real connection with the wholeness is just showing up to listen.
Yes.
And with this openness and receptivity that not just you take me in, but I need to take you in.
Yeah.
And to honor that in a way that is beautiful. And then that circle, and you and I love Rilke and the ever widening circles, but that wider circle of this planet and that wholeness there. And when I am connected with that, for me, when I am connected with the planet, that gives me the experiences and the practices and the teachings and the guidance that I need to step forward into this whole life that has all qualities.
Then I can be that little chipmunk
Then
at the center of those widening circles. Amen.
amen. And you know what, I'm just going to pause. Remember when I finished my yoga teacher training, a woman, like a mentor, a teacher I admired, said, Dennis, don't fill the space. Don't dump the energy. And so right now, as my cup feels so full, my heart and body and being feel so stretched, I just want to sit. I want to take it in. To not worry what the next thing is. To be the chipmunk, content.
It's such a wonderful image. I am going to go away picturing that chipmunk actually sitting in the hand of my heart. As you're holding your hands like that, I just thought, oh, the chipmunk is right in there, sitting right in there.
You know, it's interesting, the etymology of eco is home. And like, may I return back to this home, to the eco self that is a part of me and is a part of the planet, and to remember. And I'm going to remember this time with you, Anne, for a while. And I just want to thank you for that intimacy and the vulnerability and the courage to join me in this unfolding.
We've been doing it forever, Dennis.
Yeah. Our story will continue.
Yeah, yeah.
So much gratitude, my friend.
So much love, so many thanks. And I'm going to even send you the photo of Brahmana holding the chipmunk.
I would love to see that.
Great.
All right. So much love, Ann.
Love you. Bye-bye.